Traditions and Encounters, Chapter 16, page 303. The medieval expansion of Europe. During the High Middle Ages, the relationship between Western European peoples and their neighbors underwent dramatic changes. Powerful states, economic expansion, and demographic growth all strengthened European society, while church officials encouraged the colonization of pagan and Muslim lands as a way to extend the influence of Roman Catholic Christianity. Beginning about the mid-11th century, Europeans embarked on expansive ventures on several fronts: Atlantic, Baltic, and Mediterranean. All those ventures signaled clearly that Europeans were beginning to play a much larger role in the affairs of the Eastern Hemisphere than they had during the early Middle Ages. Atlantic and Baltic colonization. Vinland. During the 9th and 10th centuries, seafaring peoples from the Nordic Scandinavian lands began to venture far from Europe to the islands of North Atlantic Ocean. They occupied Iceland beginning in the late 9th century, and by the end of the 10th century, they had discovered Greenland and established a small colony there. About 1000 CE, Leif Erikson left the colony at Greenland and took an exploratory party south and west, arriving eventually at modern Newfoundland in Canada. Because of the wild grapes growing in the region, Leif called it Vinland. During the years following Leif's voyage, Greenlanders made several efforts to establish permanent colonies in Vinland. Ultimately, however, their efforts failed because they did not have the resources to sustain a settlement over the stormy seas of the North Atlantic Ocean. Nonetheless, the establishment of even a short-lived colony indicated growing capacity of Europeans to venture into the larger world. Christianity in Scandinavia. While Scandinavians explored the North Atlantic, the Roman Catholic Church drew Scandinavia itself into the community of Christian Europe. The kings of Denmark and Norway converted to Christianity in the 10th century. Conversion of their subjects came gradually and with considerable resistance, but royal support for the Roman Catholic Church ensured that Christianity would have a place in Danish and Norwegian societies. Between the 12th and 14th centuries, Sweden and Finland followed their neighbors into the Christian faith. Crusading orders and Baltic expansion. I'm going to go ahead and show the map for this area so you can kind of see. Crusading orders and the Baltic expansion. In the Baltic lands of Prussia, Livonia, and Lithuania, Christian authority arrived in the wake of military conquest. During the era of Crusades, zealous Christians formed a series of military religious orders. The most prominent were the Templars, Hospitallers, and the Teutonic Knights, who pledged to devote their lives to the struggle against Muslims and pagans. The Teutonic Knights were most active in the Baltic region, where they waged military campaigns against the pagan Slavic peoples during the 12th and 13th centuries, aided by German missionaries. The Knights founded churches and monasteries in their territories they subdued. By the late 13th century, the Roman Catholic Church had established its presence throughout the Baltic region, which progressively became absorbed into larger society of Christian Europe. The Reconquest of Sicily and Spain. The boundaries of Christian Europe also expanded in the Mediterranean basin. The Europeans came into conflict with the Muslims, whose ancestors had conquered the major Mediterranean islands and most of the Iberian Peninsula. Between the 8th and 10th centuries, as their society became stronger, Europeans undertook to reconquer those territories to reintegrate them into Christian society. The Reconquest of Sicily. Most important of the islands was Sicily, which Muslims had conquered in the 9th century. During the 11th century, Norman warriors returned Sicily to Christian hands after almost 20 years of conflict. Islam did not disappear immediately, but as Muslims either left Sicily or converted to Christianity, Islam gradually disappeared from the island. The Reconquista of Spain. The Reconquest of Spain, known as the Reconquista, took a much longer time than the recapture of Sicily. Following the Muslim invasion and conquest of the early 8th century, the Caliphate of Cordoba ruled almost all of the Iberian Peninsula. A small Christian state survived in Catalonia in the far northeast, and the kingdoms of Leon resisted Muslim advances in the far northwest. The process of the Reconquista began in the 1060s from these Christian toeholds. By 1150, Christian forces had recaptured Lisbon and established their authority over half the peninsula. Their success lured reinforcements from France and England, and in the first half of the 13th century, a new round of campaigns brought most of Iberia into Christian hands. Only the kingdom of Granada in the far south of the peninsula remained Muslim. It survived as an outpost of Islam until 1492, when Christian forces mounted a campaign that conquered Granada and completed the Reconquista. The political, economic, and demographic strength of Christian Europe helps to explain the reconquest of Sicily and Spain as military ventures. Especially in the case of Spain, however, it is clear that religious concerns also helped to drive the Reconquista. The popes and other leading clergy of the Roman Catholic Church regarded Islam as an affront to Christianity, and they enthusiastically encouraged campaigns against Muslims. When reconquered territories fell into Christian hands, church officials immediately established bishops and asserted Christian authority. They also organized campaigns to convert local populations. As a result of those efforts, the Roman Catholic Church began to displace Islam in conquered Spain. The Crusades. The term crusade refers to a holy war. It derives from the Latin word crux, meaning cross. The device on which Roman authorities had executed Jesus when a pope declared a crusade warrior would take up the cross. As a symbol of their faith, sew stripes of cloth in the form of cross on the backs of their garments, and venture forth to fight on behalf of Christianity. The most famous of these crusades were enormous expeditions that Roman Catholic Christians mounted in an effort to recapture Palestine and the holy city of Jerusalem and Muslim authorities. Pope Urban II launched these crusades in 1095. The response to Urban's appeal was immediate and enthusiastic. A zealous preacher named Peter the Hermit traveled throughout France, Germany, and Low countries, whipping up support among popular audiences. Within a year of Pope Urban's call, the Hermit had organized a ragtag army of poor knights and enthusiastic peasants, including women, and set out for the Palestine without training, disciplined weapons, supplies, or plans. Not surprisingly, the campaign was a disaster. Many members of Peter's band died, and few had made it back to Europe. Yet the campaign indicated the high level of interest that crusading idea generated among the European public. The First Crusade. Shortly after Peter's ill-fated venture, French and Norman nobles organized a more respectable military expedition to the Holy Land. In late 1906, the crusading armies began the long trek to Palestine. In 1907 and 1908, they captured Edessa, Antioch, and other strategic sites. In 1099, Jerusalem itself fell to the Crusaders, who then proceeded to extend their conquest and carve conquered territories into Christian states. Although the Crusaders did not realize it, hindsight shows that their quick victories came largely because of division of disarray in the ranks of the Muslim foes. The Crusaders' success, however, encouraged Turks, Egyptians, and other Muslims to settle their differences, at least temporarily. In the interest of expelling European Christians from the Eastern Mediterranean, by the mid-12th century, the Crusader communities had come under tremendous pressure. The Crusader state of Edessa fell to the Turks in 1144, and during the Third Crusade of the Muslim leader Salah al-Din, known to Europeans as Saladin, recaptured Jerusalem in 1187. Crusaders maintained several of their enclaves for another century and even embarked on several more military expeditions. But Saladin's victories sealed the fate of Christian forces in the Eastern Mediterranean. Europeans did not immediately concede Palestine to the Muslims. By the mid-13th century, they had launched 5 major crusades, but none of the latter ventures succeeded in reestablishing a Christian presence in Palestine. The Fourth Crusade went badly astray. Venetian authorities contracted with military leaders to supply enough ships to transport some 30,000 crusaders to Palestine. When crusaders could not come up with sufficient funds, Venetians directed them instead to conquer the Italian port city of Zara, a commercial rival of Venice, and then to attack Constantinople, the most important commercial center in the Eastern Mediterranean. In fact, the Fourth Crusade never made it to Palestine. The ignoble venture ended up with after the Crusaders conquered Constantinople, subjected to the city to a ruthless sack, and installed a Roman Catholic regime that survived until 1261. The Byzantine Empire never fully recovered from the blow, and lumbered along in serious decline until Ottoman Turks toppled it in 1453. Yet even though the latter crusades failed in their principal objective, they inspired European dreams of conquest in the Eastern Mediterranean until the late 16th century. Consequences of the Crusades. As the Holy Wars intended to reestablish Roman Catholic Christianity in the Eastern Mediterranean basin, the Crusades were wars of military and political expansion. Yet in the long run, the Crusades were much more important for their local social, economic, commercial, and cultural consequences. Even as European armies built Crusaders states in the Palestine and Syria, European scholars and missionaries dealt with Muslim philosophers and theologians, and European merchants traded eagerly with their Muslim counterparts. The result was a large-scale exchange of ideas, technologies, and trade goods. The profoundly influenced European development through their sojourns in Palestine and their regular dealings with Muslims throughout the Mediterranean basin. European Christians became acquainted with the works of Aristotle, Islamic science, and astronomy, Arabic numerals which Muslims had borrowed from India, and techniques of paper production which Muslims had learned from China. They also learned to appreciate new food and agricultural products such as spices, granulated sugar, coffee, and dates as well. as trade goods such as silk products, cotton, textiles, carpets, and tapestries. In the early days of the Crusades, Europeans had little to exchange for those products other than the wool textiles, furs, and timber. During the crusading era, however, Italian merchants seeking to meet the rising demand for luxury goods developed new products and marked them in commercial centers and port cities. Thus, Nicola Maffeo and Marco Polo traded in gems and jewelry, and other merchants marketed fine woolen textiles or glassware. By the 13th century, large numbers of Italian merchants had begun to travel well beyond Egypt, Palestine, and Syria to avoid Muslim intermediaries and to deal directly with the producers of silks and spices in India, China, and Southeast Asia. Thus, although the Crusades largely failed as a military ventures, they helped encourage the reintegration of Western Europe into the larger economy of the Western Hemisphere. I will read the summary on this one. Like societies in China, India, Southwest Asia, and the Eastern Mediterranean, Western European society experienced massive change from 500 to 1300 CE. Unlike those societies, however, rulers of medieval Europe were unable to reinstate an imperial form of government for centuries. They did not participate actively in the larger trading world, the Eastern Hemisphere. Yet Western Europeans found ways to maintain relative order and stability by decentralizing political responsibilities and relying on local authorities and regional states for political organization. The development of self-sufficient manners allowed Western Europeans to expand agricultural production, which in turn spurred population growth as well as trade. In addition, Western Christianity preserved elements of classical Roman society and established a foundation for cultural unity in Western Europe. It was on these solid foundations that Western Europe underwent through political and economic reorganization in the latter Middle Ages. Regional state maintained good order and fostered rapid economic growth. Agricultural improvements brought increased food supplies, which encouraged urbanization, manufacturing, and trade. By the 13th century, European peoples traded actively throughout the Mediterranean, Baltic, and North Sea regions, and a few merchants even ventured as far away as China in search of commercial opportunities. The Roman Catholic Church prospered, and advanced educational institutions reinforced the influence of Christianity throughout Europe. Christianity even played a role in European political and military expansion, since church officials encouraged crusaders to conquer pagan and Muslim peoples in Baltic and Mediterranean lands. Thus, even in the absence of a strong imperial power, by 1300, Western European people had strengthened their own society and began in various ways to interact regularly with their counterparts in other regions of the Eastern Hemisphere. This is the end of chapter 16.